Welcome back to another episode of the Daily Turnup. Thank you guys for joining back. We are so excited to do another episode. I think one thing that has helped out our podcast the most, outside of you guys being absolutely amazing, is that America is absolutely wild right now. And there's always a brand new headline that is just absolutely crazy. And as people that are in this industry right now trying to cover it, it is great for business, but probably not great for all other aspects of our life. So I do want to say thank you everyone for listening to the last episode. We had over 350 views, breaking records. It's so amazing. We are so excited. But what we notice more than anything as we're like doing our notes and trying to figure out what's going on in the United States is that United States, Russia, Ukraine is still the biggest talking point. The new wave of tariffs with Mexico, Canada, and China, and then Trump's speech to Congress the other night. And we sat down, we're like, hey, these are the big three. We got to cover them. So, CK, you ready to dive into it?
I'm always ready, MR. Yeah, 350 views and our first angry commenter. So
Let's go.
I feel like we're a real podcast now.
Yeah, we have people hating what we're doing. What a great feeling. All right, so CK, I'm going to start off by giving a quick, and I mean very quick summary of the United States and Ukraine's relationship. And I want to turn over to you and ask you a few questions because I did an episode on this last week by myself, and I think you can offer a really, really great, opinion and thoughts towards this. So start the timer. Let's see if I can do this in under 60 seconds. So Trump basically, was running on the election or when he was running against Kamala saying, hey, I want peace everywhere. I want peace in the Middle East. I want peace with Russia, Ukraine. I want people to stop dying. I just want deaths to stop. And that's kind of the platform that he ran on. And when he was coming into office, he said, hey, day one, I'm ending this war. Well, we're way past day one. The war is still ongoing. But he stuck pretty true to wanting to end the war. And that brought in a lot of issues with the EU, basically saying, hey, we still got to keep going. And Zelensky was getting worried too, because a lot of what the war effort in Ukraine is relying off the backbone of American weapons and American money and all that stuff. So Zelensky came over to the United States trying to work out this mineral deal. The United States is like, hey, we've given so much money, we've given so much resources. You exist because we allow you to exist right now, and we need something more out of this relationship. And so Zelensky came over to try and work out this $500 billion mineral deal. Well, if you have a phone or the internet, you pretty much saw the meeting with Trump, Zelensky, and JD Vance just blow up in front of the entire world. Now, I'm sure you have your opinions, whether it's like, hey, it's Zelensky's fault, hey, it's Trump's fault, whatever. I'm not going to try and convince you whose fault it was, but it happened. It was ugly. I thought it was honestly embarrassing for both sides. But when Zelensky left, Trump basically kicked him out. And I think within 24 hours or 48 hours, he's like, hey, we're going to stop our funding to Ukraine.
Yep.
So Zelensky's in a world of hurt. He goes over to the EU. The EU wraps their arms around Zelensky saying, we got you, bro. And then if you read the headlines, I think they're committing an extra $2 billion. I mean, shit, we've almost given over $200 billion. And there's like, oh, we're gonna make some more weapons. Well, if you look into it, they have to make the weapons. They don't have weapons that can match the United States, what the United States has delivered on hand. So you're talking months, I don't know, maybe years down the road. So it felt like the EU was promising a lot, but it was all talk because the actions are going to take a significantly long amount of time. And Zelensky, Ukraine, maybe they have enough to withstand Russia, but it's still really, really tough. And so obviously Trump has been attacked so much by abandoning NATO, by abandoning allies, by being Russia's puppet. And Trump right now is sticking to his word. And I saw some reports the other day, I think yesterday, that Zelensky wants to come back to the table and basically sign away all the mineral rights. And then I also read that France wants to send troops into Ukraine and trying to get the coalition of the willing to put troops in Ukraine, which obviously would only escalate it. And so, CK, there's so much going on in Ukraine right now, so much going on in Europe, and so much that can affect the entire world. And some people are scared of World War III. So, first question I have for you: does the United States owe Ukraine support? Do we owe Ukraine anything, or should we be backing them to the day this war is over?
Yeah, let me reframe that, because do we owe them support? We've already provided them 175 billion is a lowball number in how much we provide in aid. We've also imposed over 2,500 sanctions on Russia, which has decreased their economy by 2.1% and increased inflation in Russia by 20%. So, do we owe them support? I mean, it's not really a question because we've given them a lot of support. The question is how much, and is it a blank check? Do we owe them support? Do we have to see this through to the very end, or it does it stop? And I think, I guess that depends on your opinion. But in terms of U.S. interest, like we've seen this in countless of wars that never end. There has to be an exit strategy, right?
So let's
And
pivot to that. Because I agree. We've given Ukraine so much more than anyone, quadruple, 100 times more than anyone else. But it comes to exactly what you're bringing up. What is the end state? What is the end state in the United States' mind? What is the end state in Ukraine's mind? What's the end state in Russia's mind?
yeah, Ukraine is probably, driving back Russia, defeating them, and gaining all of their land back. Russia is probably a little more complicated um, because I don't think there's an end state where they own Ukraine, and I don't think there's an end state where they cede back the land they've taken. So it's complicated. What's the end state for us? It depends on what regime you're talking. If you're talking with Biden's regime, the end state is support to the end. But Trump has clearly stated America first and American interests. So we support as long as that support is in line with American interests. And I think Trump has argued that right now we've met all American interests and probably we've done more than meet American interests. And now we haven't been looking out for American interests for a long time in this war. Uh, Ukraine supported, Russia's weakened significantly, and with our economy and our inflation and our debt, we are no longer interested in funding the war.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's so sticky. And I think this is why peace is so hard, and why it may not happen for a while. Is that I find it incredibly unlikely that any territory that Russia currently occupies within Ukraine that they're willing to give back. And I think Ukraine wants a lot of that territory. I think you can pretty much write off Crimea as staying within Russia, like almost no matter what right now, unless the Russian government collapse. So it's really just what exactly are they fighting for? Are they just fighting for a few more miles of just destroyed terrain that's been bombed out? Because it seems like both lines are so dug in that the fight is, I don't know, they're just fighting to fight at this point with no real side budging, right? I don't think the front lines moved much in the last 9 months since early summer. Um,
Yeah, well,
and
to that point, I think if you're
yeah,
Russia, you see light at the end of the tunnel if the American well is drying up.
yes, maybe it gives them a renewed focus, knowing that the European Union can't back it up. But I really only think, I mean, honestly, I think that Trump's just pulling back on the supply to force Zelensky's hand to the mineral deals, and once it happens, he'll give supply back. I think it's just a negotiating tactic. Some people could say that's unethical. Some could say he's a great businessman, and we're just gonna say that we think that's what's going on. And so one thing I think is important, right, is there's so much criticism towards the United States in abandoning NATO and abandoning the European allies, even though Ukraine's not a part of it. How do you see Trump's backing off from NATO in general and backing off support for Ukraine affecting our allies in Europe?
Yeah, we're seeing multilateral talks, uh, that don't include the United States about support for Ukraine, led mainly by the UK, France, and Germany. Macron floated ceasefire talks. He since rejected those talks about ceasefire. Uh, we're seeing money commitments, but really not significant money commitments. I think the UK committed 3.8 billion in 2025, which is kind of a drop in the bucket compared to what Ukraine's been getting. But like to that, I would say, if the EU takes on this war and does it and ramps up their military and their defense spending and their support, and all of the countries not named the United States of America step up, I would say Trump looks at that and says, "Great, I've been asking for this since 2016. NATO's finally stepping up." And if they don't, Trump will say, "I told you so." So like I don't see either of those as like a loss for Trump. This is exactly like Trump saying this needed to happen and it's not happening. So either Trump was right or they do it and he gets exactly what he asked for 8 years or 12 years now.
Yeah, hey, I'm happy you brought that up because I think that's so true. Like Europe's rallying together, they're saying, "Hey, we're going to do all of this in spite of the United States," but it is exactly what the United States wants. It's exactly what the Trump
Yeah, they're saying
administration wants.
finally.
Yeah, they're saying we'll show you the United States, and we're like, no, this is exactly what we want because if we go to war against China, uh, we actually need you to do something. Which brings me into my next question: is where does China fit into all this? Because we've talked a few times that hey, we don't really see Russia as a near peer threat anymore, mainly because the war has just decimated their economy, decimated their military to the point they're relying on Iranians and North Korean soldiers to fight. And it's really only China that is the main threat, and a threat that we probably more than likely can't handle ourselves because just their sheer population. And we need strong allies, not strong allies in name like France, Germany, Britain that had, yes, massive powers during World War One and Two, but now are an absolute former shell of themselves. So we're forcing our NATO partners to actually do what they've promised to do. And where does this fit in China? Where does China fit in this?
I to be honest, I don't see China playing a role because we haven't seen a role thus far. And China, I don't think China and Russia really get along other than the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
Yeah.
But like to that point, you haven't seen a lot of movement. I could see China maybe making moves toward Taiwan or Hong Kong, while we're distracted with Ukraine. But again, that hasn't happened yet. That probably could have happened in the last 4 years. I think China is so long term strategy. So like 2035, 2045, especially the big number they throw out is 2049, where they
Yep.
become the premier world superpower and the US is no longer really relevant on the world stage. That's their goal. This is too short term for them. They're not going to get bogged down in the mess of the short term because all they have to do is wait. If we're distracted in Iraq and Afghanistan and then Russia, Ukraine, and then the next one, while China's just focusing on long term, like
Yep.
we're just spending money on things that aren't China, while China's spending money on us specifically and solely.
I literally do not think I could ever say that better than you just did. And to just touch one more point on that, one, I think you're spot on. And two, if China's focused on us, and I really think they're overall focused on Taiwan right now and getting into position to take Taiwan, China also said, I believe it was today or yesterday, that when the United States put tariffs on them, they're saying, hey, we will we're prepared to fight any type of war, a tariff war or any type of war, hinting that they go, actual hot war with the United States. And I think we need an entire episode to dedicate just to that. But if something happens with China and you look at the map and you're trying to draw, how can we counter China? I think a few things. One, you need a strong Europe. And if this is the kick in the ass that Europe needs, you like then it is what it is. And then I think Russia plays a huge part in it too. Now I know people call you know uh, Trump Russia's puppet, but if you can at least make lukewarm relationships to the point where you just don't want to kill each other, and Russia somehow isn't involved in a war, I'm not saying they need to join the Allies side. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying to where they aren't eager to take on Europe and the United States head on, then I think that's a massive win.
Yeah, it certainly wouldn't hurt. I think the biggest key to China, if you were to ask me, is India, but
Oh,
that's
they
for a
hate
whole
each other. They
that's for,
hate each other.
yeah, that's a whole nother podcast. We don't have to dive into that rabbit hole right now.
Perfect, perfect. So, what are your final thoughts? You got any final thoughts on the United States, Ukraine, and how this is going to end, or what the next step's going to be?
Yeah, Trump he read a letter from Zelensky during the State of the Union, saying that Zelensky apparently, I don't think he mentioned this, but I've seen news on it saying Zelensky apparently apologized, and he said that Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table and ready for peace. Uh, Next week, I believe on the 10th of March, U.S. and Ukraine officials are meeting in Saudi Arabia to discuss, and I quote, a framework for peace.
Okay.
Zelensky will be in Saudi Arabia. Apparently, he's not meeting with the U.S. envoy. He's meeting with Saudi Arabian leaders. But the timing of that, there's probably going to be some talks with Zelensky. Maybe they just won't be behind cameras.
That's fair. That's fair. One thing before we pivot, I just thought of it and I wanted to bring it up. There's a lot of things I've seen on the internet, and Zelensky said it himself when he was with Trump and Vance, is saying like, "Hey, whatever deal we sign with Russia, they're just going to break it because we don't trust them." And I actually think there's a significant amount of truth in that. And I also think Russia's way too weak right now to be able to just turn around in a few years and try and launch another invasion. I think that dynamics will change so much where it becomes very unrealistic for Russia to try and invade Ukraine again in 5, 10, even 15 years. But all right. So I want to move on to tariffs because if you look anywhere, there's tariffs everywhere. The stock market crashed. Eggs are $10. The whole world's freaking, well, America's freaking out saying, hey, tariffs are a terrible idea. Every economist ever saying, why do we do this? Tariffs are terrible. They're just the worst. And so I started doing some research on tariffs. Now, I'm not an expert, for the people that in the comments just want to talk about how we should never talk economics because we're not experts, disclaimer, not an expert. But hey, I can use Google and I can look up some fun facts. And so I didn't actually realize how badly the United States was tariffed. So I'm looking, and during Trump's speech, he's like, hey, yeah, like India tariffs our auto market. And I was like, what? Look at India tariffs 100 to 125% on all U.S. car imports. Now, the reason, well, they want to build up their own auto industry, and the only way they can do that is to make sure that other countries don't come in and sell their better cars. And I was like, oh, okay, what else? Well, the EU also does a 10% tariff on all U.S. cars. The EU does a 25% tariff on U.S. soybeans. India does a 30% tariff on U.S. apples. You have Japan doing a 38.5% tariff on US beef, South Korea doing a 40% tariff on US oranges, and the list just goes and goes and goes. And the theme is like, hey, the United States is getting tariffed a lot. I actually didn't know about that until I researched it the other day, but I think it's important to note, yeah, we're talking tariffs, but the United States is also being tariffed itself. So, CK, before we specifically jump into Canada, Mexico, and China, what are your thoughts on tariffs, the purpose, the good, the bad, and honestly, why so many against us?
Yeah, pros and cons. You want to protect domestic industries, protect domestic jobs. Um, Obviously, it's a source of revenue, uh, local production, and then I think a big one that we understate is national security. If you're relying on Russian energy, then when you go to war with Russia and you don't have an industrial base to produce energy, you're kind of screwed. So I think national security is a big one, often understated. Cons, it's not the free market, right? When you have a free market or non-free market entity controlling prices, a tariff would cause, everyone says, oh, the buyer ends up paying. Well, it's technically shared. It's shared by the seller and the buyer who pays the tariff. And I don't want to go too deep into the economics, but it's based on the elasticity of the demand and the supply. But basically, because it's shared, when you have a buyer paying a higher price than they normally would and a seller getting a smaller revenue than they normally would, you produce deadweight loss. There's economic activity that doesn't happen because of the tariffs. So because it's not free and it's not the invisible hand of the market guarding it to equilibrium, tariffs cause less economic activity, and that's the main reason people would be against tariffs. But again, another pro I didn't mention is a negotiating tactic. If you're getting
Yep,
heavily
yep.
tariffed, you know, it's a good counter. And right now, I think we are people put a lot more tariffs on the U.S. than the U.S. puts on them.
Yeah, it seems that way. And so right now in America's current state, is tariffing the right move? Is going on a tariff war with Canada, Mexico, and China the right move? I said earlier that China says, "Hey, we'll go to any type of war you want. You want a tariff war? Game on." And they hinted at a hot war. And then I believe we postponed Mexico's tariffs another month. So I'm assuming some type of deal and negotiation worked out. But hitting our two closest neighbors and then our unofficial enemy of the world, is that the right move?
I I think so. We have the U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement, which replaced NAFTA, Atlantic Free Trade Agreement. And in that trade agreement, there's quotas, milk, cheese, for all dairy, poultry, and eggs, other goods. And when those quotas are met, all U.S. imports are tariffed by Canada and Mexico up to like 270% for milk, 300% for butter. So like they tariff us incredibly high. We don't do nearly the same as them, if any. And
Wait, what? What? They're tariffing us already that amount?
yeah, and their argument is, well, the U.S. agreed to it in this deal. Well, okay, fine, but we're not agreeing to it anymore.
Dude, that's insane. Man, I should do some more reading. I had no idea they were tariffing that much. Like, I
Yeah,
was actually listening. I was listening to another thing too. And Canada's apparently tariffs its own. I know they're not called state, but their own regions. Like with goods traveling back and forth. I'm like, this is a whole world I've never heard of. And I'm looking at mainstream media, and they don't provide any real information on this whatsoever. And it makes me so upset.
it's all one-sided because the mainstream media will say tariffs are bad, but then Canada will tariff us, and they say, "See, Canada's tariffing us. Good on Canada." Well, I thought tariffs, it's not a blanket good or bad, and I think in some cases, especially retaliatory, especially when we have the chips. Again, you go to the negotiating table in a position of strength. We are at the position of strength economically, militarily, in terms of who is needed and who gives, who people rely on. They rely on us. They need us for military, economic, everything. We have the position
Yep.
of strength. We need to renegotiate these deals so that they're more in our favor, at least fair. They need to be 50-50. And right now we're getting ripped off. That's Trump's argument. It's been his argument. So we're getting ripped off, and I'm going to impose these tariffs until someone goes to a negotiating table and says, let's get more fair terms. And that's why Trump loved Japan. He even says that. He says, I went to Japan and I said, you're ripping us off. And he says, I knew you were coming. You know, we have been ripping you off. Let's talk about it. But no one wants, there's just too much media involvement spinning everything.
Wow. So I think you're spot on, and what I think is the biggest problem about, well, I think there's a lot of problems, but one of the biggest issues with Trump's administration is they do a horrible job at messaging. Like I'll watch Trump speak and I'll be like, oh my gosh, this is like painful. And I know we're about to hop into like when he spoke to Congress earlier in this week, and I'm like listening to his speech, I'm like, oh my gosh, if like he could just really articulate the right things, we could probably get a lot through, because I feel like a lot of this is just, hey, am I marketing and advertising my goals and what I want to accomplish correctly so I can get people on board? He talks like he shoots from the hip when he talks. He doesn't always sound the most intelligent, or he'll just like make these little like digs at the last second of a sentence. And I really think it hurts what he's trying to push, because, like you said, if you look at this objectively, hey, we're getting screwed. Countries know we're getting screwed, and then we push back, and now the whole world freaks out, including our own media, which makes no sense. And we have to realize, to your point, we are in the position of power. We are finally acting like we're in the position of power. We're finally acting like we're not the weakest member at the table, and we're like, whoa. We're done getting screwed over. If we want to compete with China in 20 years, we can't be losing these little micro battles, because it's going to be death by 1,000 cuts.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. China proceeds with us, and diplomacy and in the information warfare, economically, they proceed like they're at war with us. We don't.
Yes.
We treat war like war and everything else like peace. But it's a, it's time we start treating everything like war, because that's China's goal, is to beat us before we even fire the first round.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And so let's pivot into our last topic, which is talking about Trump speaking to Congress. So the other night we watched Trump give his speech to Congress, and it got a little out of hand early. And I think by both sides. One thing, it doesn't matter if it was Biden or Trump or Obama, the party that has the president always stands up and claps every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever. I just want to listen to the person speak. I hate that so much. Um, but the big thing that stood out, and it stood out early, was Al Green, the Democrat. I believe he's out of Houston. I know for a fact he's out of Texas. And so if you hate Trump, you're probably thinking that Al Green's the greatest American, that he was standing up to evil, and by Trump, or I guess in this case the Speaker of the House, Johnson, kicking him out, was like, ooh, oh, that's a dangerous precedent you're setting. You're kicking people out. That never happens. That's can be some considered some very horrible dictatorship moves right there. And then if you support Trump, you're just like, hey, this Al Green dude, he deserves it. He was a total a-hole. He antagonized. He didn't sit down once. He wanted. It felt like he staged almost a showing to force their hand to be like, hey, you have no choice but to kick me out, so I can try and paint you as the bad guy. And so it broke earlier today that there was a vote on the censoring of Al Green. Now, it doesn't mean he's literally going to be censored. I think it's just a way to like hold congressmen accountable. All Republicans voted against him, and 10 Democrats voted against him as well. So it showed that even the Democratic Party is very upset with Al Green and how they're handling this. And so, CK, I'll let you touch a little on this Al Green, and then anything else the key takeaways you got from Trump's speech.
Yeah, I mean, it's all theater. That State of the Union.
It
I
feels that way, doesn't it? It
I
really
just can't
does.
stand it. It's theater. It's just theater, all of it. I mean, I'll I, I just keep thinking of like The Office when the episode where there's a dinner party and Jim gives Dwight a book about dinner party decorum,
Oh my
and
gosh,
yeah,
yes.
the more
Yes.
volume displayed, the more volume is displayed, the more honor is bestowed upon everyone present, and like that's like Mike Johnson, like Sergeant at Arms, remove that man. Just I can't do it. It's theater. The one thing I noted, I mean, the speech is forgettable. Trump's speech is forgettable. It's I heard the same thing 1,000 times. I'll say the Democrats, the protest, it was just it didn't do anything. The bingo cards, it was all theater nonsense. The thing I noted is that the Democrats, they're in panic mode. I mean, they don't have a leader. Who is it? Pelosi, maybe was in her prime the leader. She's past her prime. She's gone. You saw her, like, I don't know what she was doing in the stadium. They flashed her a couple times. She just looked like she belonged in a nursing home.
Can I say one thing real quick? Thank
Yeah.
goodness. The fact, and I'm going to be real honest here on both sides. Thank goodness Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell are on their way out. I mean, I don't want to get too personal because I might go, well, it's probably not unbiased because it's both dinos on both sides, but they are part of what's wrong with our political system by being in that position of power for so long. I mean, you just look at her stock trading portfolio. She's outdone Warren Buffett and everyone else. That level of corruption there is so mind boggling. CK, you just triggered me. I am literally triggered right now.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I mean, who is the candidate for a leader, like the leader of that party? You have maybe AOC. She's just too on the fringe, and just honestly, just not the person. You have maybe Hakeem Jeffries or Jamie Raskin. What I'll say is respect. I'll give is Gavin Newsom, and I am not personally a fan of Gavin Newsom. I think he treated COVID terribly. I think he's been awful for the state of California. But he did start a new podcast, and
I
he just
saw.
had Charlie Kirk on it. And
I
Charlie
saw.
Kirk, if you watch that podcast or at least clips of it, did not hold back. No punches held. Like they got real, and he was pretty insulting to Gavin Newsom's face. And I respected the move. Like, let's have a long form discussion, no editing, no nonsense, and let's just be real with each other. You can say whatever you want, and we can disagree, and we can still talk. That's what you want. If you're a Democrat, get past the 12-minute or 12-second CNN clips, and let's start talking. Your point versus my point. May the viewers decide which point is the best.
It
And
feels like they're taking a play right out of Trump's book. Trump was really credited with going on all these different podcasts, including Joe Rogan, a bunch of others, helping him push it past Kamala. And I think you're right. I think Gavin Newsom's trying to become the face of the Democratic Party. I've heard a lot of rumors, and I mean, and this seems like a very good first step because everyone knows that Charlie, what's his last name? Charlie what?
Kirk.
Kirk, he's a hardcore Republican, hardcore Trump guy, MAGA guy. And so by sitting down with him, which one, CK, to your point, respect it. But two, I also think Newsom's terrible. Like when you just look at the state of California, it's just in every major company's leaving it. Tesla left, Apple's trying to get out, Google's trying to get out. I think In-N-Out just moved its headquarters to Nashville. It's really hard to see like, hey, the guy looks the part and he sounds the part, but his actions have took one of the wealthiest states in America and made it a place where everyone's leaving. So respect the move, but very hesitant to be like, is this the guy you want to lead the party? Because he ran California into the ground.
Yeah, to play devil's advocate to that, though, I mean, California's still running surpluses. Uh, you know, still, I mean,
Fair.
it's still like I think is it the biggest GDP of all states or the
Is
second
it?
to Texas? I don't
Might
know.
be
Fact check
Texas
me,
now.
but they're still major. You still have Silicon Valley, like uh, a lot of tech comes out of California. You have major cities, so California is not like you can say he ruined it. I mean, he would argue that I'd take California over Oklahoma or any of the flyover states or any state, not named like New York or Texas or Florida. So, I mean, you can make the argument. Some people will probably like Gavin Newsom's policies, but either way, like it, don't like it. I respect the move for having Charlie Kirk on. I respect the long form conversation unedited.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. I just tried to Google it real quick, and it does look like California does have the largest GDP in the country, and they have approximately a $500 billion worth of debt right now, making it the state with the highest debt in the United States. And so I think that's where it's coming in. And you and I are both really, really big on debt.
That's
So,
pretty new debt though, and I would say debt per capita or debt per GDP is I'm pretty sure California is relatively low in like debt per GDP.
ooh, well, maybe we talk about that next episode. I like it. Mainly because I'm trying to like type with one hand into my phone right now, trying to get the answer. But no, I like it. I like it. All right, CK, before I wrap this up, do you got any final thoughts for the daily turnups?
Nope, let's get to 500.
Yeah, I love it. Well, everyone, thank you so much for listening to another episode. We appreciate it so much. 500 is our new goal, like CK just said. So please like, please share, please tell everyone about it. Please subscribe. And hey, comment too. We started replying back to comments. So far, they've all been like, oh my gosh, we don't agree with you. You're crazy. And we respond back. We would love positive comments. They're not as, clickbaity, but hey, you know what? We'll get what we can get. So, everyone, thank you so much for listening. I think this is our best episode yet, and we'll talk to you next week.